Hello tanks and tankettes, and welcome to a tanks replay, and one featuring that well-known tier 8 speed demon, the T28 Prototype, which, to be fair, these days is actually reasonably mobile. It certainly is compared to how it used to be. I was sitting here watching this replay and it really does not gel with my memories of playing this machine at all, but when I played it, you know, you felt lucky if you got to like 18 kph. And you certainly would have, on a map like this, struggled to get anywhere at all. It's certainly not enough in time to actually make a difference. It was one of those tanks where you pick a flank and you stick with it, because at that point, you're committed. Fortunately, however, that's just not true anymore. I mean, it's still not a fast tank, but Montana Grizzly here is actually able to make a reasonable speed over to the other side, because his platoon mate has probably said on comm, so Seattle Forge there, and he's actually a reasonably long time viewer, I think, has presumably said, get your ass over here, it looks like we need some help. And so Montana Grizzly is actually able to come over here, and even sort of going up this slope, you know, once upon a time that would have been 15-16 kph maybe. And now it's like a blistering 20. It's like, my god, how is this even possible? But, you know, Wargaming do buff things from time to time, so we'll give them credit where it's due. This is probably a much more comfortable machine, a much less frustrating machine than it would have been once upon a time. The armour, I don't think, is any better. I mean, it's in this kind of matchmaking, the armour really isn't worth a lot at all, but it does at least have a decent gun for a tier 8 tank destroyer. It's got a fairly nice penetration, and even though the damage isn't massively high, of course, the ISU at tier 8 just completely distorts the tank destroyer average damage. So yeah, it's actually all right for a tier 8. It's pretty reasonable these days. So the enemy team have been pushing. But I mean, he's turned up in time to rack up some decent amount of damage, and he actually gets to finish off an Object 140 right through the front plate without needing any premium ammo. So, you know, it is a good enough gun for facing tier 10s. It's just you don't really want to put your armor to the test against the tier 10s. So they've stabilized things, which is good. But what's happened on the other flank is we've had a bunch of tanks push forward into a whole bunch of enemy tank destroyers, and that's going pretty much as you would think. There's also a Type 5 Heavy who has racked up 2 kills, and I'm not quite sure how they've managed to maneuver themselves around to going across the bridge towards the enemy cap. But I can tell you right now, that's not going to be successful. Him and the HWK-12, they're not going to last. That is not really a tenable position when there's that many enemy tank destroyers still in play up in that northwest corner. So a little bit more damage. In fact, he's up to 2700 now, which is alright. And Seattle Forge, I don't know what damage he's on offhand, but he's gotten himself a kill as well. So he's going to press forward. And now they just have to deal with a T62A and a whole bunch of tank destroyers. And this is the part where it's going to get annoying, because most of their remaining tanks, apart from Seattle Forge, not Seattle Forge, well, Seattle Forge is kind of like half health, but most of them are very low health. And I think Montana Grizzly is the only one that has any appreciable number of hit points left. In fact, he hasn't taken a single hit so far. So really, oh, there we go, the Scorpion G's actually got an okay amount of health left as well, but really that's all they have is their hit points. They don't have any armor. So yeah, it's absolutely dependent on getting good spotting on these now very likely to be camping tank destroyers. We can see the S1 actually trying to pull back, which means Montana can get some shots, and one more should do it. There we go. So the S1's out of the way. That's one dangerous tank destroyer taken down. Again, not huge damage, but very good penetration, which is par for the course for most of the Swedish tank destroyer line. Well, for the higher tiers anyway. So the 262A and the 263 are obviously the biggest threats. The Scorpion G is very, very low health, but you know, that gun still packs a wallop. But they do, in principle, have a reasonably good chance of doing this. They have a numbers advantage, but that numbers advantage is starting to dwindle. Now this is the point where we have to think, well, could Montana have moved, or is this still the best position? And this is where the fact that this is, you know, it's better in terms of mobility than it used to be, but it's still not a fast machine. That's where it becomes very relevant, because from here he can cover his allies, and this gun is not like amazingly super accurate, but he has a decent chance of giving his allies some help from up here. Now if he'd gone forward and was now on kind of level ground and a much closer position, at that point he'd be relying on his still not particularly good mobility. He'd be relying on his not that great armor in this context, and you know, personally, I'm of the opinion that, I mean, there are some people that get kind of salty at him in the chat for being the last one alive and, hey look, he's got full hit points. But he's got full hit points because nobody's shot at him. It's not because he's not been doing stuff. So I'm kind of the opinion that he probably made the right call here by sitting up here and giving fire support to his allies, because if he tried to get down there and was in the mix himself, there's a very good chance that this might have had a different outcome. Now, it is arguable that you know, other people might have a different opinion, that actually maybe he should have tried to get more up close to support his allies, but he wouldn't have had that field of view, and as it is, it's now 1 versus 1, and the T62A is low health. So even though it's a tier 8 versus a tier 10, and that tier 10 can easily punch through his armor, he's got a good chance of killing that T62A with 1 shot. And so the odds actually are in his favour at this point, even though there's maybe 1 or 2 teammates that were a bit vexed by the fact that, hey look, he survived with full health. He's still going to potentially win them this. He's got to really screw it up in order to give this away. So there was a brief moment where the T62A was on their cap, but you know, that would have just been a good way to a draw, and so the T62A, to their credit, is actually trying, even though the odds do seem stacked against them. You know, Montana does have the advantage here. The best the T62A could really hope for would be to come up from an unexpected direction and just try and whittle his health away. But there we go, a rare instance of the armor working, but it was the standard APCR, it wasn't the premium ammo, interestingly. But as it is, I mean, the T62A wasn't really trying to do the unexpected things. They did get spotted moving to that position and then popped out from that position again. So yeah, it was in the end a little inevitable that Montana would win that, but it is slightly unusual even so to see a tier 8 coming out in that kind of situation quite so well. But then we look at the team list and we see, well, actually the platoon there was top, which was, you know, that's always nice to see. Montana, by far the top of his team, 1460 base XP. But you look at the enemy team and it was that 268 that was absolutely kicking everyone's butt, sitting in that corner, and 263 rather, sitting in that corner and racking up over 7,000 damage. And the rest of the team really, there were some all right results, you know, but considering that this was a reasonably high tier match, looking at the damage some of those high tier tanks was doing, it was yeah, it was a bit mixed. Some of their own high tiers were performing better, even though it did still come down to a very, very close result. So there we go, the new-ish improved T28 prototype, and it was a pretty good match, I thought. And yeah, you don't see an ending like that every day, but it was sort of inevitable. Montana, as I say, he would have had to seriously screw up, or else maybe get some incredibly unlucky RNG by getting ammo racked, which might have been an entertaining video in its own right, although for very different reasons. So hopefully you enjoyed this one, and if you did, you can hit the like button, you can leave any comments below, you can sub to my channel if you haven't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.